Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the astrology of March 2021, and I am just very happy that you're here with me. I wanted to say a special thank you to all of my patrons who have been so supportive and wonderful throughout really all of last year and the beginning of this year. If you would like to join the Patreon family, you can go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin, where you get access to these videos earlier, as well as access to other videos that are only ever made available to patrons. So with that, let's get started. March is definitely a big deceleration in intensity compared to January and February. To do a little bit of a recap, we have had the Saturn-Uranus square hovering really since the start of this year. And the reason for that is that when Mars entered Taurus in early January, it immediately squared Saturn and conjoined Uranus. Because of that, that Saturn-Uranus square, even though it wasn't exact yet, was essentially activated and completed by Mars's presence in a fixed sign. And because of that, January and February were so intense and very frequently violent because Saturn-Uranus was already active even before that actual aspect perfected. In addition, I'm sure, depending on your location, you probably saw a lot of COVID cases and deaths in January and February, and the Saturn-Uranus square was linked to that as well. So what happens now is that since that square has passed, at least for the moment, we get a bit of a reprieve until Mars in Leo, which is going to be in June and July, essentially remakes that Saturn-Uranus square. So I think things are generally going to start feeling a little bit more normal, a little bit mellower until early summer. And then we're going to get a little bit of a replay and a revisiting of what we saw earlier this year. March has a very different energy compared to January and February. It quietly seeds events that will come to fruition potentially many months or even years later. So one of the things that we'll see making a new start is Venus's new synodic cycle with the Sun, which always relates to social cohesion and attention to things like social justice and fairness. And really, the whole idea is that the reason Venus relates to things like social justice is that the ultimate goal of that is to bring about greater social cohesion, right? Don't keep people apart, put them together, hopefully in a more harmonious manner. So when Venus will go retrograde this December, I think we'll have to look back to this period, to March, to really understand how we got there. There are going to be some interesting ties between what happens in late March and what we'll see happening in December. The other thing to remember is that the first half of March is influenced by the Virgo full moon of February 27th. It's not technically in March, but it will still cover the first 2 weeks of March, so we can't forget that. And just as a recap from February, this particular full moon has a general theme of improvement. The ruler of that lunation is Mercury, and he just has stationed direct, and this is of course always a symbol of things improving, of things gaining momentum and strength. And now he applies to conjoin Jupiter in this full moon. Also, there is an exalted Venus in Pisces who will conjoin the Sun in this lunation. So overall, the first 2 weeks of March hold a lot of potential for hope, generosity, and just generally a more positive outlook. The one caveat to me is that Mars is on the fixed star Algol at 26 degrees Taurus, which is considered very violent and has a lot of potential to be very destabilizing in a sudden way. So in locations that are ruled by Mars, or in locations where Mars is angular in this location, there could potentially be violence or accidents or some kind of dramatic natural disaster. However, apart from these kind of very specific, very stochastic events, overall the mood is quite favorable and positive for the first half of March. All right, now let's take March week by week. The 1st of March, literally, Mars will enter Gemini until April 23rd. And I think that this will represent a break from a lot of the violence and contention that marked Mars's journey through Taurus, and its square to all of those Aquarius planets, which started January 6th. That was the day that Mars entered Taurus, and of course that was the day that the US Capitol building was invaded by right-wing extremists. So for now, while he is in Gemini, Mars will play a little bit nicer, right? He has left the sign of his detriment, Taurus. He doesn't have a lot of dignity in Gemini. He is still a malefic planet, and because he doesn't have a major dignity in Gemini, he is still left to his own devices. It's just that for the moment, he is going to be fighting with words and with propaganda, for example, instead of with his fists. Because he's passing through an air sign, he is going to be making friendly connections represented by trines and sextiles to other planets, and he is going to be making a lot of long-term plans, which is a very air sign activity. So again, the battleground for the next 7 weeks is primarily going to be verbal and propagandist and plan-centered in nature. Now, March 4th, Mercury will conjoin Jupiter again, and it'll be at 17 degrees Aquarius. This will represent the beginning of a new cycle involving the legal and political system. Just as an example of the power of Mercury and Jupiter, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the U.S. Supreme Court Justice, died during Mercury square Jupiter last year in 2020. In addition, I think the postal services and delivery services could get a lot of hopefully favorable attention around this time. And I think that around this date, around March 4th, we'll see important new legislation passing. Perhaps it'll be the COVID Economic Relief Act. It's difficult to say, but I think that this particular combination is very legal, it's very political, and it always concerns the movement of money in one way or another. So we could also see some important messaging from the Fed. Now, in the second full week of March, we'll get the new moon at 23 Pisces on March 13th. Jupiter is the ruler of this new moon, and so the theme for the following 2 weeks will be Jupiterian. It'll have to do with prosperity, but also generosity, because Jupiter in Aquarius cares about the well-being of the community, and justice, of course, because that is one of the themes of Jupiter. Now, if you remember from my 2021 forecast video, and also my videos about Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, that Jupiter in Aquarius does bring us this unique once every 12 years opportunity to rebuild things for the public good. He is the ruler now, so he will get to bring some of these promises to fruition. The Sun and Moon also conjoin Venus in Pisces, so there are many opportunities right now to help large groups of people, right? Pisces is always very empathetic and very caring. So here's a chance to put our compassion to practical use. The question to ask ourselves now is, what can we do in this moment to help others and really all of us in the long term? Now, the full third week of March will be fairly active. March 15th, Mercury will enter Pisces until April 3rd. Now, he has been in Aquarius for over 2 months. So I think this change will bring a noticeable energetic shift just because we've gotten so used to the Mercury in Aquarius energy. Mercury in Pisces, I think, is very nonlinear. You know, it's very deep, very mystical. And because it's in a Jupiter sign, it's ruled by this pretty idealistic Jupiter that we've got going right now. Jupiter in Aquarius will bring that focus on doing well for other people through mercurial means. So I think at this moment, we'll see charitable and perhaps stimulus or government money handed out pretty generously during all of this Mercury in Pisces period. March 20th is the start of the astrological new year, when the Sun enters Aries. It's the spring equinox, the first day of spring. Now, this particular moment, the chart set for the moment the Sun enters Aries every year, is called the Aries ingress, and it determines the quality of that season, the quality of spring, as well as the year overall, because it's kind of the New Year's chart, really. Now, I expect to make a separate video just about the Aries ingress, but very quickly, if we look at the Aries ingress set for Washington, D.C., it's quite an improvement over last year's, right? We have this nice social benefit and infrastructure-focused Jupiter in Aquarius right on the ascendant, and the moon in Gemini applies to trine it. The moon represents the people of the country that the ingress is set for, so I think there's a pretty clear indication that money seems to be coming in quite dramatically compared to last year. The mood also lifts quite dramatically because Jupiter, of course, is very optimistic and positive, and he's right on the ascendant, which represents the totality of the country, the mood of the people for that time period. So there is money for rebuilding right now because that's Jupiter in Aquarius. And Jupiter also rules the lot of fortune, which has to do with cash and the nation's finances on a personal as well as a national level. And then Mars, who rules the second house of money in this chart, trines Saturn, which is the planet ruling the people. So there's definitely an interest and energy as well as resources available for rebuilding things. It's a very active period. Now, COVID, since that's going to be, I'm sure, a question on many of your minds, does seem present, but it seems significantly more subdued compared to 2020, as indicated by the moon's placement in Gemini in the 4th house. The moon here rules the 6th house, so it has a co-signification for illness. And because it's in Gemini and in the 4th house, it definitely seems a little bit lower and less intense than pretty much all of 2020. The fact that it's trine Jupiter is also very positive because that generally can represent a potential for healing, right? Things get better from illness. Now, the 4th full week of March is extremely busy, astrologically speaking. March 21st, Venus will enter Aries after having been in Pisces, and this is a big drop in dignity for Venus, right? She goes from being exalted in Pisces to her detriment in Aries. So if you were putting numbers on it, usually exaltation is worth 4+ points for positive points, and detriment is worth -5. So totally it's a drop of 9 points for Venus. So you can just get a sense of how significant this loss is. What this means is that if you are taking a Venusian role right now, whether it's in your career or your personal life, or if Venus rules something like your profected ascendant for this year, you could experience a potential loss or some kind of downgrade right now. We could also hear of a famous woman or someone else who's enacting that Venusian role, like an artist, for example, who loses an exalted position around this time. Now, that same day, March 21st, Mars will trine Saturn at 10 Aquarius, so the malefics, who are usually difficult both to one another and to others, are playing pretty nice right now, right? So if you are Mars, you might get a favorable hearing from someone in power or an older person at this point. Politically, I think that this moment suggests some kind of alliance between aggressive Mars, whoever Mars represents in society, people who like to carry guns or who carry them for a living. But there's also this alliance between them and powerful backstage players symbolized by Saturn. Now, March 23rd, Mercury will square Mars at 11 Pisces and 11 Gemini, so we could see public arguments about the big picture versus the details. Mercury is debilitated, but he is in a superior position to Mars. So this suggests that the big picture is favored right now, that mercurial empathy and willingness to give other people as many resources as possible likely wins over here. March 25th, Venus will conjoin the Sun at 5 degrees Aries. This is a superior conjunction because Venus is direct, and it is the start of their synodic cycle. Now, Venus is debilitated in Aries. Remember, just a few days ago, she lost dignity by moving into Aries. But she is received by the Sun into his exaltation, so they get along very well, even if she can't contribute much to the relationship. So it could be a revival of Venus's fortunes. So in other words, if the narrative is she loses her exalted position around March 21st, but then she is raised up beside the king around the 25th. So it's quite a dramatic reversal of fortune on the positive side for Venus. March 28th, we've got a full moon at 8 degrees Libra, and Venus will be the ruler of that full moon. It is going to be on Vindimiatrix, which is a fixed star at 9 degrees Libra, and the star can be associated with arrogance and overreach and the consequent disgrace because of that. Sometimes it's also associated with widowhood or loss in that way. We could see someone who is in a perhaps subsidiary or subservient position could try to assume more power than they actually should, and then things might not end so well for them in the upcoming 2 weeks. Now, because Venus is in Aries and received by the Sun, this period is going to be about relating, right? This conjunction is really about the push-pull of relationships with others, personally and socially. So I think we're going to get a lot of really interesting discussion and developments around How do we get along with one another? And what's the appropriate way to socialize, right? In the United States, at least, the vaccine is being rolled out against COVID, and in general, cases are down. So, okay, we would like to go out there and be social, but can we do that? To what extent is it safe? I think this period is going to really bring in a new way of thinking about what's safe and what's appropriate. I think that generally on a personal level, this is a great chance to rethink how we relate to others, and we can also make some pretty strong or deep structural changes to fit our new way of thinking. Really, the synodic cycle is going to be active for a long time, so I recommend that whatever you do right now, however you rethink your relationships, think about the future and think where you want to be, not just where you are at the moment. March 30th, Venus will sextile Saturn at 11 degrees Aquarius, and it's not the strongest aspect being a sextile, but it's very supportive of Venus, right? She is having a tougher time in Aries, and a sextile to Saturn, I think, could be a very nice stabilizing assist to her impulsivity and to her flamboyance. Same day, Venus will also reach her maximum distance from the Earth. And when that happens, Venus is a bit otherworldly and idealistic in this particular phase. And it's just a great opportunity to dream kind of far out dreams and then interpret them for the rest of humanity in a dramatic and exciting manner appropriate to Venus in Aries. And then March 31st, we get Sun sextile Saturn also at 11 Aquarius. This really kind of bookends that stabilization theme of this week and makes it more public and official. So if there is something that you've been creating, something exciting that you've been planning, March 31st could be a great opportunity to make it real and make it concrete. So overall, the March themes really give us opportunities for a lot of broad-based growth and stabilization, both personally and socially, and an opportunity to think about how our actions impact not only the rest of society, but also future generations. This moment, I think, has great visionary potential, and so we should take advantage of that. If you would like to learn more about 2021, I encourage you to go to my 2021 forecast video, also on this YouTube channel, just to get the larger picture and get a sense of where March fits into the whole year. If you haven't yet done so, please subscribe to the Nina Griffin channel on YouTube. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Nina Griffin.